I'm being recorded for history.
Zidin, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Lois, I am a big fan of yours and I want to become an author. And, I always thought that reading is just a hobby. How true is that? And can one carve a career out of it? And, can one pin one's hopes on this career? Or do you just have to be lucky to be discovered?
Well, luck is part of it, of course. But we sometimes make our own luck, or we influence our luck. Certainly, writing can be a career for some people. It's not an easy job to be successful at because, and this is a wonderful thing, there are so many people who love to write and so many books being written, and only a few of them will be published. So you create your own luck by working hard at it, which of course you already will do if this is what you've chosen. And studying and reading great literature is of course part of the preparation for being an author. But you also, sometimes kids are surprised or they haven't thought it through when I point out to them that writing as a career means that you will sit alone in a room most of the time. You can't hang out with your friends while you're pursuing your career. It's a very solitary job. Most of us who want to be writers, and you, I assume, enjoy that part of it. We like being alone with words. But it certainly is out there as a career, even as the mechanics of it change, as books become less solid and more electronic, still the stories will always be there and they will always need someone to write them. Even though now we worry about artificial intelligence, which of course is going to be able to write books, I don't think that will ever replace the human emotion. The feeling that someone like you has for words and the sound of words, the flow of words, the fluency of language, that will always require, I think, a human brain like yours. And I think it certainly is out there for you as a career. And you will aim yourself toward it. And there are, of course, many people who become writers have studied and gotten credentials in work that involves books, like librarianship, teaching, because you have to make a living and you have to get paid in order to do that. And it's a good thing to have a job that you can rely on, because writing books is not a reliable source of income. But it's something worth aiming for if it's something that you truly love, I think.
Oh, yes. I remember watching an interview of yours, I think it was Oxford Press, where you said that I was not getting the next idea. And I thought that I will never be able to write again and I'm going to die poor.
I often when I finish a book and it's newly published or about to be published, it's time to write the next book. And that's when I think, oh dear, my brain has died. I will never have another idea. And then something happens that triggers a new idea. I have a new book out in this country, just published this month, I guess. And it was triggered by something I read. I picked up a magazine and it had an article about a body that had been found in a peat bog in northern Germany. And the body was determined to be 2,000 years old and was thought to be a 13-year-old girl. And I looked at a picture of this mummified body, 2,000 years old, and I thought, what was her life like? Why did she die at the age of 13? And a story began to take shape. Of course, I had to do a lot of research, but that's what this new book is about. And now that book is finished, it's published, and I'm starting to think, oh dear, I'm never going to have another idea. My brain has now died. But at the same time, I know that's not true.
Well, keeping our fingers crossed. Adya, would you like to take the next question, please?
How can we raise more readers and raise readers more? With your vast experience in the field, could you suggest on how to make children readers and better them at reading?
Okay.
I had a little difficulty hearing all of that, but you were talking about how to make readers out of children. Is that correct?
Yeah, and better them at reading.
Yeah. You know, the most effective and important thing that people can do is to provide good books. And I was lucky, and I imagine most of you were lucky in the same way, in that I had a mother who, it could have been a father, of course, but in my case, it was a mother who read to me when I was a little girl. And I lived in a house that had books and that appreciated stories. And I also, now that I think about it, I had older relatives who told stories as well. So I think providing that atmosphere for a child, the atmosphere where stories are valued and told and retold and read and reread, is the thing that creates readers. I had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My girls were always, and as when they were children, I always read to them. They lived in a house filled with books. And yet, when they grew up, when they became teenagers, my girls continued to read, and my boys became athletes. They went out and played baseball, and they didn't read anymore. And one of them later, when he was in college, was taking a course that involved literature. And he said to me, "These are good books, Mom. Why didn't you make me read more?" And I said, "I couldn't make you read." So he came to it himself, but it took him longer. I think the important thing is to have books, present books, read books to your children, but also to present yourself as someone who values books. So the people who love you will see something you value, and they will begin to value it themselves. But you can't make people read. You can give them all the tools and hope for the best.
Okay, we just have a couple of more questions. So I think Anirudh has one question.
Yeah.
Anirudh?
Yeah. So we as ardent readers tend to live in the shadows. We try not to discuss books and shy away from being labeled nerds and insufferable know-it-alls. This is detrimental to the development of the reader community. What will you suggest shall be done to overcome this?
I don't have a good answer for that, but I can tell from listening to you that you are someone who values, I mean, you're here because you like literature, you like reading. And if you present yourself to the world that way, the world will appreciate that. There are always, particularly during adolescence, there are always going to be those who look down on you and me as nerds. But as you get older, we're the ones who emerge as more interesting than all those other people. Sometimes you just have to wait, I think, and go through that period of time. I mean, we didn't use the word nerd in my childhood, in my teenage years. That word hadn't been invented yet. But always there are kids who are book lovers and young intellectuals, and who are made fun of because we're not cheerleaders and athletes. So sometimes you just have to wait that out and know that when you're older, you're going to triumph over those other guys.
Okay, so I'm going to take this instead to say, woo! Okay, I think there's Agastya has some questions, some gender issue. All right, Agastya, please go on.
Hello. It is surprisingly, but recently the books are being categorized on the lines of gender. It is awkward to be bracketed like that. How can we restore equal rights?
Now,
Okay.
I'm not sure, and maybe someone will have to explain to me what you mean when you say books are being categorized by gender.
I think what he means is, like, for example, romance. Romance is for girls and action and adventure are for boys. Things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, like that.
Genre. Okay, all right.
That's probably, you said recently that's happened. I think that's probably always been true. I'm thinking back. I mentioned my sons who didn't become readers until later in their life, but when they had to read a book for school for a book report, they'd always get out a biography of a baseball player or some sports related book. And so I think perhaps that's always been true. I don't know. I need more time to think about that. Romance, you mentioned. Is that something girls are more interested in than boys? I don't know.
I can't quite answer that. But personally, I sometimes like reading romance books just to have a break from the normal action and fighting.
Yeah.
Good for you.
You know, there will always, though, always different people will have different interests. And I'm perhaps not ever going to like the kind of books that my friend likes, but that's why it's a good thing that there are so many books and so many departments in the library. If you don't like this section, you go to a different section and find what appeals to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think there is Dia. She has a question about The Giver.
Hi, Miss. So, I think Ayan had asked one of my questions, which was, so when you were writing, writing The Giver, you said you unintentionally created the world in grayscale or black and white without color, right?
Yes.
So, that was one of my questions. The second was, you mentioned that you sometimes add yourself or include yourself when you're writing your characters. So in The Giver, are there any characters that you, when you go back and read, you see, oh, like I relate to that character?
You know, most of my, most of the main characters in most of my books are female because I was a young girl once, and it's easier for me to go back into the young girl that I was. But even when I choose to write about a boy, as I did in The Giver, and then in the third book in that series, the main character is also a boy, and then in the fourth book, it's Gabe. I perhaps draw upon my own sons, but the characteristics of the main characters don't rely on gender. So all of the main characters in my books will have some element of myself as a young person. All of the main characters will be introspective, for example. They're thinkers, as I was, and I also think that writers have the privilege of going back to their own young self, writers like me, and rewriting their own young self to make them something they wish they had been I was a very shy child and an introvert. I always wished that I could be self-confident and popular the way some children in my classes always were. And so I go back and I create characters who are me at heart, but who have the attributes that I didn't have and that I wished I could have had. It's one of the fun things about being an author is that I can rewrite my own history a little bit. But always the main characters will be me in some form. And usually that takes the form of having imagination and introspection and intelligence. Without those things, a character isn't very interesting, I think.
Okay, I think Snehin has just raised his hand. I believe he wanted to say something.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
So I also wanted to ask a question related to the giver only. So I wanted to ask, the society in Giver, the community, was very objective and very black and white, very orderly. But Jonas was developing like feelings. He was somehow evolving. So I wanted to ask whether the book emphasizes more on feelings or on reasoning, or it conveys that both should coexist.
It's interesting. I didn't realize this when I was writing the book. But when I created Jonas's community, I based it in a way, in part on my own life, because my father had been an army officer. He was a military officer throughout my childhood and growing up years. And so we often lived on military bases. And they would be separate from a nearby town or community. And they would be very much like Jonas's community, very orderly, very rigid, very safe, like his community. But everything was military in its feeling. For example, back in my childhood, and now when a woman, and this is I'm being sexist, I guess, but it's still generally women who do laundry, okay? And nowadays, and myself, I'll put my laundry in a washing machine and a dryer, okay? But when I was a child, women hung laundry on the clothesline outside. And on a military base, the rule was you could not leave laundry hanging on a clothesline after 5 p.m. And so I remember my mother suddenly looking at her watch and saying, oh, I have to get it was just a crazy rule, but we lived by those rules. And so when I created the world of Jonas, it feels to me very much like those military bases that I lived on. My father had a relatively high rank, and so we always lived in a big house. People of lower rank lived in a smaller house. You could tell exactly who everybody was by the living conditions on those military posts. And now I've forgotten his question. Oh, but then, of course, Jonas is different from the other kids of his community because he has these special qualities and has been chosen to be different in a way. And so he begins not to fit in well with that rigid and orderly community. And I think it's fair to say that probably I, at Jonas's age, would have been much like him, would have begun, as I did, to rebel against that structure and that rigidity.
Yeah, thank you. I think the last person is Akriti. So she's the last question we have. Akriti? I think she's written it in the chat. If I may,
let me look. Yeah.
Yes. So,
Akriti, you can come on. Yeah, that's better.
Yes. So I'm a big fan of the setting description, which you've mentioned in the giver, and a number of stars as well. So I'd like to know, have you ever incorporated some of your personal beliefs in the setting and ruling descriptions? And are there any ideas which you've shelved previously and you would love to touch upon in the future?
I think all of my books reflect my personal feelings, but I'm careful not to, I don't want to preach to an audience. I don't want to inflict my personal beliefs on readers. Many readers and teachers have found religious symbolism in the giver, Christian symbolism. And I didn't put it there. I didn't intend for it to be there because I wanted the book to be accessible to anyone, whatever their beliefs. And interestingly, at the same time that Christians sometimes will find Christian messages in the giver, Jewish people will give it as a bar mitzvah gift to boys turning 13 because they see it as a book of I can't think of the word I would want, but you can envision what I mean. A young boy becoming mature and taking on the responsibilities of adulthood. So as I said, I try very hard not to put any of my own, whatever my own beliefs might be, I try not to put them into my books. And yet there are certain general themes that I think are true for all of us, themes of all the good qualities that we all aspire to. One can find in my books without having any specific political or religious agenda. And now I've forgotten what the rest of your question was. I started thinking about that, and I know you asked something else and I've forgotten. But I think perhaps that's a good way to end, is just for me to say that I think I try very hard to impart values in my books without them being specific to any political or religious system.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to have you with us today at Bookbibuli. And what we're trying to do is promote reading, and especially starting from children. So majorly, we have a podcast, a platform to talk about the book he or she has read. And this month, we are going to have both Number the Stars and The Giver. And we are going to complete 1 year on 1st of April. So starting that, we will convert today's session into a series of podcasts and bring it out to our readers so that everyone can hear your views. It has been wonderful hearing you and seeing you. And I'm so happy. It has been really, really nice. So thank you so much for being with us. And you've helped us in promoting this endeavor, in promoting reading among children, which we desperately need, especially the onslaught of devices. And I guess we'll all need to work towards this. So thank you once again for being part of this.
Thank you. Even though I've not been to India myself, I feel as though I've had a little visit there today, and that's been very pleasant.
Yes, and we look forward to seeing you in our country one day.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone else for being with us today, and happy reading.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, India and Florida.
Bye-bye.
And that brings us to the end of the signature series, Interaction with Lois Lowry, The Giver. Or does it? Will it ever? Some events in life are too good to be true. Sometimes so good that they don't feel real, are surreal. These are so unbelievable that our brain places them somewhere in between the dreams, imaginations, thoughts, and memories, as none of the compartments can believe it to be theirs. This is that event. And when Lois talks, it seems an edited version of a book is coming out, ready to go straight to the print. The words seem to flow from her mouth, each finding its place, none a better fit. Guess very little would end at the cutting room floor. We were spellbound. Now I know why it is spellbound. We were bound by the spell of Lois Lowry. She can talk for hours, and we can listen forever, oozing 86 years of life, exuberant, happy, and one who makes you feel happy. So good with children. She's a child's friend. She's a child's grandmother. She is a child, and the child in her is always ready to speak out. Watch her say, "I love your question. Thank you. You might fall in love." Thanks, Lois, for giving us this moment in our lives. A moment which still seems unreal, out of a dream, an imagination, a memory, or a wish. This spell can never be broken. Happy reading.